This matrix shows all pairwise dissimilarities of our flower-like stimuli according to a model instantiating the biased sampling mechanism. Throughout this talk, we will always rely on the correlation distance as measure of pattern dissimilarity. If you're interested in details of the models or the key importance of the choice of pattern dissimilarity measure, please contact us in our poster or in the question session. So, each of the 8x8 blocks highlighted in this matrix captures the expected dissimilarity structure for 8 grading orientations for specific radial frequency phases. For example, each 8x8 block along the main diagonal of the full matrix exhibits the expected pattern dissimilarities when gratings are presented with apertures with the same radial frequency phase. For this in-phase condition, the biosampling model predicts the representation of grading orientation should reflect grading angular disparities, and gratings in the same orientation should reveal minimal distances, as indicated by the dark blue cells along the main matrix diagonal. Instead, orthogonal gratings are maximally dissimilar, as indicated by the hot colors, here sort of yellow. Importantly, the biased sampling model predicts the same representation of grading orientation also when the modulators of the visually presented gratings are in antiphase. In stark contrast to the biosampling model, the edge effect model predicts that the representation of grading orientation for gratings presented with apertures in antiphase will exhibit the opposite dissimilarity structure. Perhaps counterintuitively, this model predicts that identically oriented gratings across aperture phases, specifically in antiphase, will be maximally dissimilar, as indicated by yellow cells along the main matrix diagonal. To summarize, let's arrange these key observations in a 2x2 table. While the biosampling model predicts the same representational structure reflecting grading angular disparities both within and across radial frequency phases, in stark contrast, the edge effect model predicts that gratings with the same orientation will be maximally dissimilar in the antiphase condition. This leads to straightforward predictions when conducting RSA, with a model template that reflects grading angular disparities. While the biosampling and edge effect models predict the same dissimilarity structure for gratings shown within apertures with the same phase, they predict opposite dissimilarity structures in the antiphase condition. Here, you see the average empirical dissimilarity matrix associated with grading orientation for the in-phase condition. It was computed by averaging matrices across subjects. Although this specific condition is not informative regarding our central question, because both competing models predict the same dissimilarity structure, it is reassuring to see a clear agreement between the data and both competing models. Let's now uncover the results of the critical antiphase condition. Even to the bare eye, the antiphase condition looks very much like the in-phase condition, and the observed dissimilarity structure inconsistent with the edge effect model. In contrast, the observed dissimilarity structure is consistent with the biosampling model, as noted when inspecting the main matrix diagonal. Distances are close to minimal for both the empirical data and the biosampling model. The pattern of results is summarized by the bar plot shown to the very right. Both the in-phase and antiphase conditions positively correlate with the model template reflecting grading angular disparity. In sum, the data supports the biosampling model, not the edge effect model. It may be fairly argued that perhaps the pattern of results in our sample of subjects is heterogeneous or driven by one single subject. To rule out this possibility, we conducted RSA analysis separately for each subject. On the y-axis of this bar plot, you see the mean and standard error of the observed correlations between the data and the model template reflecting angular disparity. Beyond the in-phase and antiphase conditions, shown respectively by the blue and red bars, for completeness, we now also show the two remaining radial frequency phase combinations allowed by our design. This is when the phase of the aperture is dephased by half a cycle, and shown with black bars. As can be observed, the results are consistent across subjects and phase offset of the flower-like modulators, as predicted by the biosampling model. At this point, we will get back to the stimulus-contrast manipulation ignored thus far to simplify the presentation of our results. Neurons in V1 are known to exhibit not only orientation tuning, but contrast invariance. This is, V1 neurons maximally respond to the same orientation regardless of stimulus-contrast level of the gratings. To test if the orientation tune signal we observed is also tolerant to stimulus-contrast, we conducted an additional RSA analysis, where we sorted all 8x8 matrix subblocks associated with grading orientation by the contrast difference of the visual stimuli. This bar plot summarizes our results. Mean correlations with the orientation model template in the y-axis are shown as a function of the difference in contrast level of the stimuli in the x-axis. The representation of grading orientation was found to be consistent across subjects and contrast levels. To summarize, we generated synthetic stimuli to distinguish the bias sampling and edge effect model of grading orientation decoding. The data supported the bias sampling model, not the edge effect model. Finally, the identified orientation tune representation was tolerant to changes in stimulus contrast, consistent with known properties of V1 neurons. Thank you for your attention, and special thanks to my PI, Peter Bandettini, as well as colleagues at SFIM, and please drop by our poster tomorrow if you have further questions. Thank you for your attention.
So we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to pick one question from the online questions. So could we see the RSA for edge effect model? So that's a question.
I think my thing's been disconnected, but so what's the question?
So could we see the RSA for edge effect model?
Do you want to see it again?
Right, so is these, anyone like to ask a question from the audience? Right over there.
It might be available on the poster tomorrow.
Right, so, okay. So maybe you can take a look at the detail and the poster later.
Yes, but
yeah. Okay. So you can, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
No problem. Didn't get the question. Yeah.
Yep. So we'll move on to the next talk. So automatically segmented olfactory bulb volume as a quantitative proxy of olfactory function. The presentation will be given by Wei-Yi Zhang.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Wei-Yi Zhang, a PhD student from the Rhineland Study German Center for Neurodegenerative Diseases. Today, I would like to share with you one of the latest research from our group, automatically segmented olfactory bulb volume as a quantitative proxy of olfactory function. Yeah. So some of you might not be very familiar with our study. So we are an ongoing cohort, community-based cohort study based in Bonn, Germany from 2016. All habitants aged 30 and above will be invited to the centers. And we plan to run for decades, and every 3 to 4 years, we will re-invite the participants. And this slide shows you our imaging protocol. So we have a 14 minutes core protocol, including structure, diffusion, resting state functional MRI, and also a body fat image. And we also have a 10 minutes free protocol, which include novel sequences, can differ from different subsets. So back to today's topic, olfactory dysfunction is something that you might hear about or experienced recently. So it is characterized as a reduced ability of odor detection, identification, or recognition. It is very common in adults, especially in the elderly. And it is of our interest because it's an early symptom for neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and multiple sclerosis. And to study the neural basis of olfactory function, olfactory bulb is very critical because it's the first relay between central and the peripheral olfactory pathways. It helps to integrate and process the odor information, and also it's a start point for some pathological changes like amyloid deposition in the Alzheimer's disease. And also recent studies found that olfactory bulb volume is associated with olfactory function, and also the volume is decreased in olfactory dysfunction patients. Among the researchers, previous work from our group examined the volume of several central olfactory systems, including the manual segmented olfactory bulb volume in 541 participants from the Ryland study. And our colleague found that olfactory bulb volume is positively correlated with odor identification in all age groups. And also, it plays as a mediator in the relationship between volumes of central olfactory structures and the odor identification, which shows some promise of olfactory bulb volume as a predictor for olfactory dysfunction, which might be applied in the clinical routine to assess the olfactory dysfunction. But the problem is that manually segmentation is a little bit difficult to apply in the general population. So how could we manage it? Our colleague Santiago developed an automatic olfactory bulb segmentation pipeline using deep learning last year, which shows good reliability and also very accurate. Also, with the HCP data, the pipeline showed very good generalizability. If you have any question regarding the segmentation pipeline, you are welcome to find him. He's also in this year's OHBM. So with the pipeline that I just mentioned above, we would like to assess olfactory bulb volume as a quantitative proxy of olfactory function in the general population by describing the variation of olfactory bulb volume and odor identification ability across the adult lifespan. Also, we would like to examine the association between olfactory bulb volume and odor identification ability. Also, we want to evaluate whether olfactory bulb volume can be a predictor for olfactory dysfunction. So to do this, we performed our study based on 3,347 participants from the Ryland study, of which 58% are female, and the mean age is 54.4 years old. The mean volume of the olfactory bulb in our population is 52.2 cubic millimeter. All the outputs from the segmentation pipeline were visually inspected. And to assess the odor identification ability, we used the 12-item sniffing sticks, and the mean score is 10 in our population. And also, we took the known risk factors for olfactory dysfunction into account, like smoking status, ApoE for carrier status, nasal congestion, cold, and heavy drinking. So to better evaluate the olfactory bulb volume and olfactory function across the adult lifespan, we have this result. On the left, we can see that the olfactory bulb volume is slightly but steadily decreased with age, so as the odor identification ability. And for the known risk factors, we found that only sex, nasal patency, and age were significantly associated with either C12 score or total olfactory bulb volume. So we took them into the final regression model, and after 5,000 bootstrap resampling, we found that the total olfactory bulb volume has an estimate of 0.011 C12 score. So in the last but not least, we want to evaluate whether olfactory bulb volume can be a predictor for hyposmia and also nosmia. So but considering the confounding by age and sex, we finally use the residues for residues of olfactory bulb volume after regressing out the age and sex effect. And then we see that for evaluating hyposmia, which means a diminished ability of auto-identification, the olfactory bulb volume by itself performs not that good with areas under the curve of 0.14. And also, because we are a general population, we want to stratify the participants into 3 age groups with equally participants. And we found that actually in all 3 groups, the olfactory bulb volume performs similarly with the areas under the curve of 0.5 to 0.54. So how about anosmia? Anosmia means that the loss of auto-identification. And we found that actually the olfactory bulb volume performs slightly better with area under the curve of 0.63. And also, it performs better in the young and middle age groups with area under the curve of 0.72 to 0.79. So in conclusion, olfactory bulb volume and auto-identification ability, we found that they are steadily decreased with age. And also from the previous described risk factors, we only found age, sex, and nasal congestion were significantly correlated with the auto-identification in our population. We found that olfactory bulb volume itself is independently correlated with auto-identification. And also the olfactory bulb volume shows promising in classifying anosmic but not hyposmic individuals, especially in younger age group. However, the prevalence of anosmia in our population is rather low, so maybe the results should be tested in a more like higher prevalence cohorts. So thank you, that's my presentation. I would like to thank all the participants of the Ryland study. If you have any questions regarding our study or you want to know how about our data or something like that, you are welcome to visit our website, and also you are welcome to write us an email. And also if you have any question about our segmentation pipeline, we have published that one last year in your image. Also, the pipeline is open source on GitHub, if you follow this link. And Santiago is the developer. He is also here this year. You are welcome to visit him in the poster session. Thank you.
Right, so we have some good questions online here. So the first one, what was the motivation for looking at order identification as opposed to order threshold or discrimination?
So basically, I think it's more correlated with our study design. We want to make the test as short as we can because auto-identification is only one part of our cohort study. We only have maybe 10 minutes for participants to actually do the test. So among all 3 tests, we found that auto-identification is more suitable for the study design, and we found that also there are a lot of studies regarding the auto-identification, and they found that it's highly correlated with neurodegenerative diseases, which is the main focus of us. So finally, we only include this one, not the other 2. So it's not that good for if we want to focus on auto-identification, but looking at the general population, I think it's also a good choice. Thank you.
Okay. So actually, we have some more time for questions. So will the Rhineland data become publicly available?
So that is our plan, but currently we are not open source yet. So, but we have also similar design as UK Biobank. If you have any ideas, you are welcome to contact us. Also contact the PI, Professor Dr. Monique Brattler. So you can tell her your ideas, and we can see how we collaborate and how to share the data.
Okay, so let's see, one more question here. How is hyposmia defined? Is it a threshold on the score?
Yes, so basically it's more than 6 and under 11, I think. So basically, if you get 1 missing, you are already in the threshold. I hope so.
Okay. Well, let's see. We still have time. So any questions from the audience? if you didn't have a chance to post your questions online? No? Okay, then let's thank the presenter. All right. The third talk is decoding the neural correlates of sustained attention using MEG and supervised learning. And the presenter is Clara L. Cantor.
Hi,
the
good
presenter-
afternoon, everyone.
Sorry, the
So-
presenter is changed. Jan
Yeah.
Harel,
So
right?
my name is Jan Harel, and today I will present work that has been done with Clara L. Cantor and myself on one of my thesis projects. So the main subject of that work is sustained attention. So first, what is sustained attention? It's a key ability that is crucial in most human activities. It has first been studied in air traffic controllers because people were realizing that the longer the shift was going and the more mistakes they were committed. But it's also an ability that is crucial for example, following a rhythm, or playing video games, or even in more mundane activities such as driving or listening to a talk. So how does sustained attention, Sustained attention can thus be broadly defined as the ability to maintain attentional focus on tasks over time and to resist distraction. So how does sustained attention work? Well, there are a few oscillations that are involved in that mechanism. First, the frontomedial theta oscillations are generated in the prefrontal cortex and are thought to exert, to support monitoring of attentional resources and to exert control over sensory motor regions through theta phase synchronization in the gamma and alpha band for excitation of task-relevant regions and inhibition of task-irrelevant regions, respectively. A recent line of research focused on moment-to-moment fluctuations in sustained attention. Using a rhythmic task, researchers were able to discriminate between periods of optimal and suboptimal performance based on the variation of reaction times. So optimal performance is associated with low variability reaction times, and it's a period in which people are usually less prone to commit errors, attentional lapses. But when errors are committed in that time, they are likely to be caused by mind wandering. On the other hand, suboptimal performance is associated with high variability reaction times, and it's a period that is more prone to attentional lapses. And in that case, attentional lapses might be caused by inefficient resource allocation. So using a variant on a classical sustained attention paradigm, Michael Esterman and colleagues were able to discriminate between optimal, what they call in the zone periods, and suboptimal performance, what they call out of the zone. So it's a gradual, continuous performance task during which the stimuli are continuously transitioning from one to another. And so it's a go-no-go task in which frequent stimuli are present 90% of the time, and the subject is instructed to respond on a response box when a frequent stimuli is presented. And rare stimuli occur 10% of the time. And using this paradigm, they were able to show that the errors were preceded by an overactivation in the DMN, in the regions of the default mode network, but also by a deactivation of the dorsal attentional network and the PPA, which are known to be task-positive regions for this kind of task. But when discriminating between periods of optimal and suboptimal performance, they showed that during optimal performance, errors were preceded mainly by the augmentation in DMN activity, while suboptimal periods were preceded by decrease in DAN and PPA activity. So now we can ask ourselves, what are the oscillatory correlates of these fluctuations in sustained attention? Based on the previous literature, we can then pose the hypothesis that these fluctuations will be related to differences in theta, alpha, and gamma band activity. So in order to test that hypothesis, we ran a magnetoencephalography study using the very same task as Esterman and colleagues, but this time on a sample of 32 healthy subjects. They performed 6 times, six blocks of 8 minutes of the GRAD CPT task in the MAG. And then we computed what they call the variance time course of reaction time, which is basically just taking what the baseline trials, so the frequent trials for which there has been a response, and normalizing these trials per subject separately, then interpolating the missing values to obtain this kind of curve. Then by applying Gaussian filtering, we smooth the curve to reflect slower fluctuations in performance. And then we perform a median split on this curve to distinguish between periods of low variability and high variability of reaction times. So looking at the behavioral data, we can see that indeed the lapse rate is lower, the attentional lapse rate is lower during the optimal performance periods compared to the suboptimal performance periods. And the omission and the effect is similar for the omission error rate. Looking at the reaction times of trials preceding errors or attentional lapse or commission errors, we can see that these trials had a shorter reaction time before the attentional lapses and a longer reaction times before commission errors. So there is variations in reaction times predicting errors in the suboptimal performance state. But now we've decided to look into the MEG data. And to do that, we segmented our signal between 400 and 1200 milliseconds after the start of appearance of a stimulus, because it corresponds to the period in which the stimulus is present in more than 50% of the image. And we compared trials that were done in an optimal and suboptimal state. So we first run a t-test on the average data, and we also added logistic regression analysis in order to explore the same data set but at the single trial level. And what we can observe here is an interesting pattern of increase of alpha activity during optimal performance period that is particularly visible in occipital regions, so regions related to the visual system. Interestingly, there was also good discriminatory power in the gamma band, but this time much broader and on the opposite direction, meaning that suboptimal performance was associated with an increase of gamma activity in widespread regions. So using this data set, we were able to attain a decoding accuracy of nearly 52%. So in conclusion, we've seen that optimal performance was associated with alpha synchronization, mostly in occipital regions. And this result is coherent with the mind-wandering account of attentional lapses. However, it's kind of counterintuitive because most of the time we relate increase in alpha power to decrease in performance. But in that case, it seems that having some kind of sweet spot in alpha activity is actually associated with an optimal state of performance. Opposite to this effect, we found an increase of gamma activity in widespread regions, which supports the notion that the gamma band is involved in attentional regulation by allowing cortical excitation. But taken together, these results are thus consistent with models of sustained attention that integrate both accounts of errors, so the mind-wandering account and also the executive control failure account that were both observed in the same paradigm. So thank you for your attention, and I thank particularly our supervisor, Dr. Karim Jerbi, who's not there today, unfortunately, and Dr. Michael Esterman for sharing the task code and allowing us to run this experiment. Thank you.
Okay, great. Some questions from the audience. So is your interstimulus interval jittered? And if not, may some of your findings be signals of anticipation?
Yes, so it's a great question because these tasks, these continuous performance tasks, most of the time they are done with some kind of jitter. And this jitter is, like removing this jitter allows us to actually interpret the task as a rhythmic task in which the entrainment phenomenon is precisely what allows to use reaction time variability to discriminate between optimal and suboptimal performance state. So when a jitter is introduced, it's actually kind of an opposite effect that we're seeing, that higher variability seems to be linked with better performance because it is linked with higher recruitment of attentional resources. But with this kind of rhythmic task, there is some kind of in-the-zone state that can be attained in which the subject is actually performing not completely automatically, but in some way effortlessly. And that's what that's the basis, I think, for that optimal state of performance.
Okay, so some other questions.
Yeah.
Have you looked at changes in pupil diameter and how that relates to task performance?
So no, we have not looked into that because we don't have an eye tracking setup at our MAG facility, but that would be definitely something really interesting. There have been works from I think Aidam Kouchi and colleagues, which are collaborators of Michael Esterman, who actually related pupil size variations and states of optimal and suboptimal performance. Mm-hmm. So that's a very relevant question. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. So some more questions. What is the contribution of aperiodic or arrhythmic activity to this effect? Are there clear oscillatory peaks in the spectra?
That's a great question, and we have not looked into that yet, but that's definitely something that's going to be on the menu. We are interested in distinguishing the 1/ref activity in this signal from the peak activity which is reflected in these bands. And that's definitely a future work that's going to explore this avenue. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there any time on task effects?
So yeah, I didn't show this analysis here because it wasn't, I feel, the most interesting aspect of that experiment. But obviously, since it is a sustained attention task, we see some kind of the phenomenon that's called the vigilance decrement, which is an increase of errors over time. And also, in the literature, using this kind of gradual CPT task, they reported an increase of suboptimal performance periods over time. So the longer the experiment runs, and the higher the probability to be in a suboptimal performance state, where more cognitive effort and executive control regulation must be exerted. Yeah.
Wow, you're getting a lot of questions. So do you think the poor performance in oddball tasks reflect over-attention?
Sorry?
Do you think the poor performance in your task reflect over-attention?
Yeah, actually, this is yeah, really our interpretation of these results. So when the subject is in a suboptimal performance, which is indicated by high variability reaction times, we think that his cognitive system is actually trying to develop as much effort as possible to stay focused on the task. And that is what I call inefficient resource allocation, because if it were efficient, it will tend to go in the more optimal performance state.
Mm-hmm. This may be the last question. Can networks like the DMN and DAN be identified in your MEG dataset?
So yeah, once again, it's a future work that's going to explore source reconstruction and connectivity measures based on that. So we plan on doing functional connectome-based classification in order to explore the relationship between the various large-scale brain networks that are involved in this phenomenon. And we hypothesize that the anti-correlation between the DAN and the DMN might be affected by switching from an optimal to a suboptimal state of performance.
Okay. So thank you for answering so many questions.
Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so then the next talk will be distinct sleep patterns linked to mental health and cognition with associated RSFC signatures. And the presentation will be given by Aurora Perrault. Okay.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, my name is Aurora Perrault. I'm a postdoc at the University of Concordia in Montreal, also in Montreal, in Canada. And I'm very excited to talk to you about our sleep behavior profiling project. So how does that work? Okay. So a little bit of history. So this project is born in the lab of Thomas Yeo in Singapore, nurtured by Valeria Kebetz and Nicole Queck. In 2021, Valeria flew to Montreal and bring the project with her. And she asked me to come on board in order to give my sleep expertise. So I'm more in the sleep side, but I'm very happy to present to you today. All right. So if I ask you if you think that sleep is important for your daytime functioning or your health, you will naturally say yes. And you will know that because you know it intimately, but also because there is many studies that show that sleep affects different dimensions of our life, whether it is mental health, affect physical health, cognition, well-being, etc. But sleep is not rigid, and it is also affected by all these dimensions of life, suggesting that there is a bidirectional relationship between sleep and behavior. And while there is many study on it, it's often single association studies that will show link between sleep and memory consolidation, sleep between sleep and depression, sleep and cardiovascular risk, etc. Or even just focus on one dimension of sleep, such as sleep duration or sleep satisfaction. What we propose today with that project is to actually use a more multidimensional approach and data-driven approach in order to extract sleep behavior profile that will be characterized by distinct sleep, self-reported sleep pattern and distinct behavior, such as in lifestyle, mental health factor, cognitive factor, in healthy adults. To answer that aim, we use the HCP dataset that not only have MRI data, but also a large range of self-reported questionnaires on many dimensions of life. Again, lifestyle, mental health, demographics, etc., but as well as objective measure of cognitive task and physical health. There is also the PSQI questionnaires, the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, that comprise 19 questions about all the dimensions of sleep. From the original dataset, we were able to use the data of 770 healthy adults between 22 and 36 years old with complete data. In order to answer our aim, we use an unsupervised machine learning techniques called CCA, canonical correlation analysis. So basically, CCA aims to maximize correlation between combination of variables in two matrices. Obviously, one of these matrices was sleep. So we used the 7 subscale of the PSQI that basically assess multiple dimensions of sleep, such as sleep satisfaction, sleep duration, but also the use of sleep meds, sleep disturbance, etc. On the other matrix, we use 18 variables that relate to behaviors that could be linked to lifestyle, but also mental health, physical health, cognition, affect, personality, etc. So we deployed the CCA on these two matrices, which extracted latent components that we call sleep behavior profile, and they will be characterized by high loading in distinct variables in both matrices. It's important to note that we're not trying to subtyping people. It is extracting profile that is within all of us, but at varying degree. Once you have profile, the idea was, can we have biological signature out of these profiles? And this is why we were looking into brain network organization of each of these profiles. To do this, post-hoc, we did association between individual profile score and individual whole brain resting state functional connectivity, which give us a functional connectivity signature per profile. So we obtained 5 sleep behavior profiles. Unfortunately, I'm only going to present 3 because of time constraint, but please come to our poster if you want to debate the others. So the first one, so I don't have a pointer, but basically we see a general worsening in sleep. As you can see, there is high loading in all the dimensions, which means general worsening, and that was associated with high loading in mental health variable in green, such as depression, somatic complaint, anxiety, but also high loading in negative affect in pink. We think this profile reflects P factor or general psychopathology. Another profile has high loading specifically with sleep duration, which means not sleeping enough. And that was associated with high loading in poor cognitive performance, whether it's low accuracy or slow reaction time in working memory, emotion processing, episodic memory, or social cognition. It seems that it's a profile that reflects more the lack of sleep and the link with cognitive impairment. Finally, we had something that is more characterized by high loading in sleep disturbance, which means anything that does not allow you to maintain sleep. So multiple awakening because of pain, sleeping, breathing problem, nightmares, etc. And that was associated with, again, some poor cognitive performance, but also high loading in mental health, like critical item, for example, but also substance abuse. This profile, contrary to the other one, it seems to be more linked to the fact of not sleeping well enough and the link to daytime functioning. Now, how about some functional connectivity signature for each profile? The first one doesn't have a clear signature, but we do see an increased functional connectivity between the subcortical region and the somatomotor network, as well as with the dorsal attentional network. And we also performed some integration segregation ratio analysis, which show a higher segregation of the visual network and the somatomotor network. On the contrary, for the sleep duration profile, we do see a very much stronger signature profile that is characterized by an imbalance between integration and segregation over the cortex. More specifically, we see that the DMN is less connected within and more integrated with attentional networks. But we also see that there is a somatomotor network that is more segregated. Another way to look at it is to compute participation coefficients that actually show how much a network is connected to other network except itself. And we do see here in blue that the somatomotor network is way more segregated and not so much communicating with the others. Finally, we have the last one that's linked to sleep quality, which show kind of a reverse pattern where we see a general reduction in the within functional connectivity in all the networks. And indeed, when we average the mean within network functional connectivity, we do see that compared to the other profile, there is a noticeable reduction in the within functional connectivity in all networks. So in summary, we use a multidimensional approach and data-driven approach in order to extract some sleep behavior profile with distinct sleep pattern, but also behavior pattern, and associated with specific resting state functional connectivity signature. And I would like to conclude with a quotation from a friend: sleep is an opportunistic window to the brain. And I think that what the project brings to the table is the multidimensionality of sleep and how sleep is central to our functioning and our health. And it highlights the fact that we should take more into consideration sleep habit questions, not only during research, when we do research on depression or any disease, but also in clinics, where often sleep questions are missing from the clinical anamnese, which is a shame, knowing that it does inform a lot on our data functioning, but also our health in general. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention and thank all my collaborators in Singapore and Montreal.
Okay, so some question. So is it possible that you measured sleepiness in the scanner?
It is a good question because the resting state is quite long in the HCP data set. So indeed, there is probably some lapses, although I think we removed those who sleep in the scanner, for example. But it is a good question, yeah. Should go.
Okay, another question. So any age effects on the results?
So no, we look into it post hoc, and there is no age effect. We only find a sex effect on the sleep quality profile, where indeed, which kind of makes sense, as women are usually more reporting dissatisfaction with their sleep.
Other one? Any? Okay, so here's one other one. Does this give insights of the mechanisms behind sleep behavior relationships?
Sorry, can you?
Does this give insights of the mechanisms behind the sleep behavior relationships?
Does that give insight?
Any mechanistic insights, I think.
So it's quite interesting, for example, for the sleep duration profile. It's a pattern that we do see, for example, in sleep deprivation studies that is linked with cognitive impairments, but they're not sleep deprived, for example, in this study. They're not in control study of sleep deprivation. So it's quite interesting to see that you see the same pattern than someone that is totally sleep deprived. So we see this mechanism, For the other, it is quite an interesting question indeed. I think it can give some link. I mean, it is, if you look at the first one, the P factor, for example, we do find the same functional connectivity alteration in the somatomotor, for example, in the P factor. So it seems to link with very specific signature in brain mechanism, yeah.
Okay, just here comes a new question. Did you do any cross-validation when you performed the CCA?
It's a good question. We're gonna do it in the coming months.
Okay. All right, I think, okay, so to what extent does behavior, for example, substance abuse, influence RSFC as well as sleep patterns?
So, can you repeat that?
Okay, so to what extent does behavior, for example, substance abuse, influence RSFC as well as sleep patterns?
Okay. So for the substance abuse and sleep patterns specifically, there is a bidirectional relationship. So one influences the other one. For the resting state functional connectivity, it's interesting to know that we try with and without those who had actually in their blood substance present, and we did find the same profile, so I don't think it will actually influence the result. Sorry, I'm not quite sure how to answer here. But come to the poster to debate with me if you have any answer to that.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, all right. So then
Thank you.
Let's thank our presenter. All right. The next talk, the title is Intracortical Recordings, Reveal Cortical Gradients of Human Exogenous Attention. And the presentation will be given by Tal Cyril Markinson.
Thank you. Next, okay. I'm very happy to be here, and this will be like an accelerated story of the poster that you're welcome to come and see at the poster session. So, attention is the process that allows us to navigate the multitude of information that surrounds us. It does so by maintaining a balance between two opposite states. A state of focus, whereby we are focused on the most important or most salient events that surround us, and without being distracted by anything else. And at the same time, we are able to switch to another state where we're, if anything important and unexpected happens, we can reorient our attention to it. But what decides the balance between these two opposite states? One important factor is the space where events are located, one compared to the other, but also time, when these events happen relative to another, is another very important aspect. So in this task, we used a very classical attention task, the Posner paradigm, as a simple case of focus and switching. So in this task, participants have to detect a target that is preceded by a cue. This allowed us to manipulate or tap into the space dimension, because cue and target can be close in space, appearing at the same side of the screen, or distant in space, appearing at opposite sides of the screen. It also allows us to manipulate the time aspect, because cue and target can be distant in time, with a 600 milliseconds delay between them in this case, leading to a behavior pattern where the detection of the target is faster when stimuli are distant in space. So here, participants detect faster when they switch their attention to another location. So this is an example of switching state, a phenomenon called inhibition of return. And in the other condition where stimuli are close in time, here with 150 milliseconds between them, we see an opposite pattern, typically known as RT facilitation, where the detection is faster when stimuli are close in space. And so here, detection is faster when you stay focused on the same location in space. So we had, in order to look at the neural basis of these focus and switching behaviors, we gave this task to 28 drug-refractory epileptic patients that were implanted with depth electrodes for medical reasons. And so we looked at the recordings that provide a high-resolution window into human cognition. These recordings have unparalleled spatiotemporal resolution that is essential for studying fast and dynamic attention processes. Pulling together the contacts from all our patients, we had 1,403 contacts with a very comprehensive coverage of the cortex, 671 in the left hemisphere and 732 in the right hemisphere. And so we were facing this very complex and big data set. And in order to make sense out of it and identify the most meaningful temporal patterns, we developed a data-driven approach called trajectory k-means that allowed us to identify contacts with similar temporal activity across all conditions. So what is a trajectory? Here you see a trajectory. I don't have a mouse, so I I will just wave my hand. So here, this trajectory, which is color-coded the time is color-coded, is a path in time occurring in a multidimensional space. So for example, my hand now is doing a trajectory in this physical space, but space can be also a more abstract, with more abstract dimensions. For example, the experimental conditions. So, and what we can do is compute a trajectory for each one of our intracerebral contacts. And so this trajectory will describe the recorded brain activity in time across all experimental conditions simultaneously. And then iteratively, we can, using a modified k-means algorithm, assign each of these trajectories, contact trajectories, to eccentric trajectories, and assign them to similar clusters. So what are we looking for in these clusters? So we hypothesized that the neural mechanism underlying these focus and switching states must be sensitive to several factors. First of all, to the space. If, for example, if the cue and the target are close in space, we would expect a stronger response than when they are distant in space. It must be also sensitive to the time. So, for example, generating an integrated response when cue and target are close in time, but segregated responses when they are distant in time. It must be also sensitive to the task itself. So if the target, because it is task relevant, it should elicit a stronger response than the cue that is the kind of destructor. And of course, the neural activity should be associated to the response time itself, which is our behavioral measurement. We also had spatial predictions, because this clustering algorithm is only done based on the temporal information. If the clusters that we find are meaningful, then they will be, the contacts will be aggregated in the brain, but not just anywhere in the brain. We wanted to see if they're embedded in large-scale cortical topography, and in this case, we chose the cortical gradient, which is a hierarchy that encompasses the entire cortex and showing gradient change, gradual change in many different features. So using this algorithm, we found 6 clusters. You can see their profiles here on the right. The first one with 68 contacts showed a visual-like activity with preference for contralateral stimuli. And 2 other clusters with more bilateral responses that show sensitivity to both space, time, and task relevance. We then looked back at where these contacts are located. You can see that on the brain on the left. So the cluster 1 in yellow was reassuringly located in occipitotemporal regions around the frontal eye field, matching its visual-like activity. And the 2 other clusters were located in frontoparietal networks regions, but divided these territories between themselves such that the cluster 2 in red was more posterior in the inferior parietal lobule around the angular gyrus, and cluster 3 was more anterior around the supramarginal gyrus. We next wanted to look at the relationship between these clusters and found that they formed a spatiotemporal gradient. So we can see that they form a gradual progression of information from the cluster 1 to cluster 2 to cluster 3. And also when we assign each of the contacts to the cortical gradient coordinate system and check the relationship between them, we see that these clusters map onto the cortical gradient and form a continuum, a topographical continuum along this cortical gradient, moving from the periphery toward more and more core regions. We then looked at the activity along this gradient cluster, and so that at the lower end of this gradient, activity showed visual modulation, while at its higher level, level of the gradient, the activity was modulated by the upcoming response time, so reflected more response-associated processes. Notably, at the center of this gradient, where these perception and action signals interact, we found the attentional effect, that are associated with the behavioral pattern, and showing us that attention emerges at the intersection of sensory and response signals over large-scale gradients. These findings reconcile long-debated perceptual-motor dichotomy in attention, showing that attention maybe arises over these large-scale gradients, and challenge a multi-stage model of attention. We wanted to take this one step further and ask, does the cluster gradient share a functional hierarchy with a cortical gradient topography? We refer to one of the features that change gradually across the cortical gradient, which is temporal integration. At the lower levels of this cortical gradient, integration windows are short, so that two successive stimuli will not affect the processing of one another. However, when we go up this hierarchy, integration windows become longer, therefore integrating over longer and longer durations, and thus there is a history effect that gets created. We checked this along our cluster gradient and found that the contacts indeed show longer and longer receptive windows. And this could be the basis for one of the observations that we see, that in the lower clusters, the lower levels of this gradient, responses to stimuli that are close in space and close in time is segregated. But as we move up this cluster gradient, the responses become more and more integrated. And this could be a new potential attention computational mechanism, for example, RT facilitation, which is when the cue and the target are very close in time. So for example, in 150 milliseconds apart, we cannot respond separately to each one of them, and therefore, if these events are binded together to a single event file, and as we see here in this integrated response, maybe accumulation of evidence starts already at the onset of the cue, and therefore we can explain like this the faster response in this condition. That's it. I would like to thank Paolo Bartolomeo, Dimitri Bell, and Jacobo Sitt, and also many other collaborators here that worked on that with me, and invite you to see the poster, and also use shamelessly this opportunity to announce that I'm looking for a PhD student to work with me in my new lab on these intracortical recordings in attention and time scales. So if you know someone who's interested, please contact me. Thank you.
So we already have a few questions here. The first is, how did you statistically evaluate the concordance of the cluster order with the 2D gradient space?
With?
The 2D gradient space of cortex?
Okay, how did I can't hear you very well, sorry.
How did you statistically evaluate the concordance of the cluster order with the 2D gradient space?
So we assigned here the context to the closest voxel, and we tested if the distance of the contacts from each of the voxel was significantly explaining what we found, and it wasn't significant. That's basically it. I don't know if there's more that we should look into it, but I'm happy to discuss this further if the person who asked the question wants to come discuss it later.
Perfect. And then next we have, how did individual variation impact the clustering? In other words, were individuals equally distributed across clusters?
If
individuals were, oh, it's moving around. How did individual variation impact the clustering? In other words, how were individuals, or were individuals equally distributed across clusters?
Okay, so this is one of the problematic parts of using intracerebral recordings. You have different locations of implantation for each of the patients. So we can never really discard this confound. However, what I can tell you that in each of these clusters we had many contribution of many of the patients. I think the minimal amount was 12 contributing patients, I think for the first cluster. But it really depends on the implantation scheme. So if each patient has his own territory that was implanted, so for sure there is a link between the identity of the patient and the cluster that its electrodes contributed to.
And then next we have a two-part question. So do you think that anti-epileptic drugs taken by the patients slowed the time courses at all? And then a second part is, do you see any age effects in the cohort?
Okay, so I didn't check age effects, so that's very easy to answer, so I don't know. The age group was between 20 and 40. I can look into it. The second thing about the drugs, so they were at different stages of their recordings, and each one of them has different types of epilepsy, so different types of drugs, different prescriptions, and sometimes if they don't generate enough seizures, then the epileptologists take them off the drugs gradually. So this is also a source of variation that is inevitable when you work with this population. I didn't try to quantify it. I can think about how to do it properly. Yeah.
And then lastly, someone asks how you came to the 6-cluster solution.
Okay, so this is this is one of the limitations of k-means, that you have to decide a priori the number of clusters that you want. And so we tested with many different cluster solutions. There's no one measurement that gives you this is the right number of clusters. We tried with the elbow method, with the silhouette, with different solutions. What I was satisfied more or less at the end is looking at the stability of these clusters across different numbers of K solutions. And so the clusters that I showed you are stable across a lot of different cluster solutions, and they remain there with the same electrodes across, even when you add more clusters or reduce the number of clusters.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our last talk here is a video talk that is from Brigitte Kaufmann, and this is going to be on the superior colliculus and its role in visual attention. Isolated SC lesions lead to neglect. And of course, we're running a little bit late.
Hello,
so
everybody.
people have to...
My name is Brigitte Kaufmann, and today I would like to present you some of our recent works regarding the importance of the superior colliculus in visual attention. In particular, visual neglect of the isolated lesion of the superior colliculus in a human patient. So first of all, let's get a little bit into the background. So regarding the superior colliculus, we know from animal models of visual attention that the superior colliculus is the last downstream structure of the fronto-subcortical network. The superior colliculi receive input from the contralateral visual field, the striate cortex, the prefrontal cortex, as well as the parietal cortex and the frontal eye field. Regarding the output of the superior colliculi, we know that they are important for processing visual inputs and control head-eye movements in response to the input stimuli we see and receive during our everyday behavior. So previous case studies in humans supported this theory by showing that after brain lesions including the superior colliculus, we see patients with visual neglect. However, we do not have direct evidence that the superior colliculi lesion produces neglect, because we have not really isolated lesions in humans. These are actually very difficult to find and also difficult to happen, mainly because of the blood supplies happening in our brains. So, however, we had let's say the lucky chance of having a patient on our neurorehabilitative unit which we were able to screen in our recent project with a very, very rare case. This is a female patient in her 40s, and she had a very, very tiny small abscess confined to the right superior colliculus. You see the abscess here quite well in the MRI scan. The red circle determines the location of the superior colliculus, so we really say it's just at the spot of the right SC. So we did a neglect assessment with this patient. So what did we do exactly? In our neurorehabilitation unit in Lucerne, we usually use the so-called free visual exploration paradigm, on which we have quite some experience. So we already showed that this is a sensitive and reliable tool to detect neglect, and that it is indeed even more sensitive than commonly used paper pencil tests. In short, we show images or photographs, naturalistic photographs to the patients. Each of the photos is presented for 7 seconds, followed by a 3-second fixation cross. And we present these images and their flipped mirrored versions. And simultaneously, we just easily kind of measure eye movements. In the analysis, we can then determine some interesting parameters, and in this particular case, in patient AB, we measured the patient's eye movement and compared it to 15 age-matched healthy controls. So let's have a look at the results. First of all, during this free visual exploration paradigm, we can use several parameters to investigate neglect. First of all, the mean gaze position, which is actually the mean along the horizontal axis of the fixation position. What do we see? We had the patient measured at 3 months after the abscess was treated medically. So we see that she still shows a shift towards the right, and the mean gaze position is well above the predefined cutoff of 1.33 degrees visual angle, which was defined previously in our recent work. However, 9 months after treatment, the mean gaze position it seems to be much better and within healthy performance. Even though at 9 months you can see in the heat map here that there seems to be something a little bit shifted towards the right, but the mean gaze position is actually okay. So let's have a closer look at other eye movement performances. So the mean number of fixation, the time spent per screen half, and early orientation. So for early orientation, I don't know if you already know, but let's repeat that a little bit. Early orientation is the first the first movement towards the right or the left in free visual exploration. It's similar to what we see from the starting point in cancellation tests. We see actually that at 3 months, here shown in green, the patient shows a typical neglect performance, showing a rightward shift of visual attention with less fixation and less time spent on the left, and more fixations and more time spent on the right. So even the patient recovers in some variables after 9 months, which is shown here in blue. We still see a significant difference regarding the time spent, here shown in the middle. Here we see an improvement indeed, however the patient still performs significantly different from the healthy age-matched controls shown in grey with the box plots. Also, early orientation, which is considered as a rest symptomacy in neglect syndrome, is still evident and didn't change at all at 9 months. So what does this actually tell us? So this rare case provides actually a very direct evidence for the role of the superior colliculus in directing visual attention and the eyes towards the contralational hemispace. Indeed, this case even suggests that the superior colliculus is not only a node in the descending visual attention pathway, but rather a crucial neural substrate in the control of visual attention itself. And also here in this summary slide, you can see that if we map the lesion of the patient, here shown in pink, and we map it on a DTI template, we see that with this lesion, parietal cortex connections, frontal eye field connection, and prefrontal cortex connection seems to be targeted. So really in line with the animal models I presented in the background previously. So we really think that this superior colliculus is not only the node in the descending visual attention pathway, but really, I say it again, a crucial neurosubstrate in the control of visual attention itself. I'd like to thank you for listening today, and I would also like to thank you, the team in Paris and Lucerne, for the support, especially Professor Thomas Niffler and Dario Gazzoli, with whom I worked during my PhD, and Professor Paolo Bartolomeo, which is my supervisor currently at the ICM Brain Institute here in Paris. So if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with us and of course download the JAMA paper. Thanks for listening and have a good day. Enjoy your OHBM conference. Bye.
That's it, right? Yeah. Okay, I think that is the end of this session. So thank you all for great talks and great questions. And thank you for staying till the end.